So today's Desert Island Diary is with Professor Toby Lowe. I'm really excited about this one. I saw Toby present about 2 months ago, and I honestly thought it was the best presentation around the NHS I'd ever seen. It's actually a clip of that is on my LinkedIn channel as well, so you should definitely watch that. So no pressure for this interview, Toby, with that intro. I'll let you intro in a second, but the purpose of these Desert Island Diary sessions is to pull in brilliant people that serve the public sector so that we can tap into their insights and their wisdom that they've captured over their careers, so that us mere mortals can pick up those insights and hopefully make a bit more of a difference ourselves. So that's the reason for these things. The ones I've done so far, every single one I've really enjoyed. It's amazing what you get out of people when you look at lifetime's experience. So given that, I'll just hand over to Toby to do his intro, and then I'll ask a few questions. But before the intro even, just to relax us in, if you look behind me, you'll see that you're now in the hammock, and you've got behind us there, we've got some drinks. What's your drink of choice for today's discussion?
Well, because it's my birthday on Friday, and I'm going to a lovely little bar just around the corner from us in Whitley Bay in the northeast of England, and they do an amazing spiced pear margarita that I've been thinking about all week.
That sounds really good. That sounds really good. I'll have to come and visit you one day and go for one of those. Okay, fab then. So your intro, please, just to kick us off.
So I have a portfolio career. The thing that is probably easiest to identify is that 1 day a week I'm a professor of public management at Manchester Metropolitan University. I've been doing that since I've been in that position since November last year, so I'm kind of 3 months into that. And then 3 days a week I am a freelance consultant, and I do that in partnership with a couple of friends and colleagues in Whitley Bay. And I try and reserve a day a week for myself to kind of pursue social change stuff through kind of slightly more esoteric and oddball ways of working. So currently what I'm doing with that 5th day a week is I'm writing a book and developing a kind of digital tool.
Excellent. I'll definitely want to pick up with you on some of those points after this session for sure. Okay, great stuff. So I'll start. I've got a loose set of questions. We're largely framed around Desert Island discs, as you can imagine. So it's that sort of feel to it. But I love this first question. I think it's really, really interesting. Is tell us about your upbringing and how has that shaped you as a person, and how has it sort of influenced your public sector focus?
So I grew up on a small holding in rural Suffolk with parents who had been set designers at the BBC in the kind of 60s and early 70s. So they were kind of fully immersed in the in the kind of London creative scene around that time. They decided to drop out of that rat race and do kind of self-sufficiency in rural Suffolk. So we had a small holding with chickens and pigs and geese, and grew a bunch of our own food, and was all that kind of all that kind of stuff. So there were 3 different hippie communes in the village that
Wow.
that I grew up in. So yeah, it was all it was they were kind of plugged into that all kind of dropping out of the rat race stuff. How that's influenced me, on the one hand, it was a kind of amazingly creative and free environment to grow up in. So I had 3 little brothers, so there were 4 of us, and we just had a ton of space to run around in and cause mischief and just like
Sound good.
explore and have all the fun we could make for ourselves. And it was an environment that was kind of really supportive of creativity and kind of believing in yourself, and it created in me a sense that kind of anything was possible in the world, that if you could put your mind to it, you could do whatever you wanted in the world. So that was really exciting. Also given me a lifelong aversion to kind of hippies and hippiedom, because I have seen the kind of all of the kind of murkiness of that stuff, and I have a really low tolerance for kind of new age stuff and things like that, because I've seen it and it's not pretty.
Yeah, I'm glad I had a shave this morning now. Okay, fabulous. So how's that? Do you think that's in any way connected you into what led you down the path of the public sector type route and that sort of thing? And how have you progressed? I presume you went to uni. What were your roles since then, and how did it all sort of progress?
So yeah, it's interesting being asked about my career, because I think the version of career that makes sense to me is how cars career across a slippery road, rather than a planned kind of progression work environment. But yeah, I went to university, and I studied politics and history at Newcastle University, and then went right through and did a PhD in political philosophy there, because I was really excited by ideas and how ideas fit together. So latterly, I have come to realise I'm a theorist to my very core. So if you cut me open, there's a little conceptual framework holding me together. Basically, it's how I understand any given situation. Is that I will theorise about it live in a moment, and the creation of logically coherent intellectual frameworks is really important to me, because that's literally how I understand what's happening in any given context. And I think that the development of effective theory is really necessary to help effective action in the world. So I'm interested in the relationship between theory and action, and how they are kind of symbiotically intertwined.
Yeah.
The kind of path I followed was after I finished my PhD, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I definitely didn't want to become an academic. So I kind of, in some respect, I failed in that respect. Because my PhD was about the concept of community, I searched for any jobs that I could find with community in the job description anywhere, and the first thing that I was successful with was I became a regeneration officer at Newcastle Council for Voluntary Service. So you were saying how did my upbringing influence me? I was always interested in kind of social change and leaving the world a better place than I found it. So that's kind of what drives me, what my kind of passion is.
The good parts of the hippies commune came through. The good parts.
Yeah, bits of that. Newcastle Council for Voluntary Service, CVS, was a really interesting. It was a great kind of first proper job, if you like, because it gave me exposure and understanding of the variety of the voluntary sector and how the voluntary sector interacts with public policy, and the kind of role of organised volunteering in civil society and the economy and all of that stuff. So it was and kind of engaging with those organisations gave me a brilliant, grounded understanding of what a whole different set of people's lives were like, because the relationships with those organisations were it enabled us to see what the reality of a ton of different people's lives were like. And it was a brilliantly run organisation. So I think that the first organisation you work for sets a lot of your experiences and expectations about what work should be like. And Newcastle Council Voluntary Service, CVS, was a brilliantly run organisation. Chief Executive Carol Howells was an amazing person who really knew what it took to create an effective organisation. Got from there, a bunch of my job there was to kind of organise voluntary sector representation and participation in kind of regeneration programs. So single regeneration, budget round 6, do deal for communities, all of those kind of things that folks might remember from early noughties New Labour activity. But I got a little bit frustrated with just engage it, creating dialogue about policy that other people made. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of go into the policy making space more. So I got a job working for the regional development agency, One Northeast. So I was engaged in helping to make a kind of policy around the relationship between society and economy, and kind of putting a bunch of that community stuff into practice. And then from there, I spent a year on secondments in the Office of Deputy Prime Minister in the Social Exclusion Unit. I helped to write the report on kind of jobs and enterprise in deprived areas. And so it was kind of getting more and more immersed in that policy making space, and decided I didn't want to get pigeonholed just with doing kind of regeneration stuff. So I kind of tried to cast my net a bit wider. What other interesting roles could I do? Found a job with the Arts Council in the Northeast. So I was their head of resource development, effectively being the bridge between the kind of arts world and all of the public service, actually. And there I had a bit of a revelation in that, because up till that point I'd been working to the idea that if I got high enough in kind of public service or policy making, I would find the mythical levers of power, and I would be able to pull those and make the world a better place. And during my time at the Arts Council, we did some really interesting kind of leadership development training, and it kind of engaged me with a bunch of leaders from across kind of private, public, and voluntary sectors. And just I had a growing realization that the idea that I was working to of becoming more and more senior as a way to creating change might be mistaken, because it seemed to me that once people got into really senior leadership positions, either the levers of power that I thought were there actually weren't, or people became so irretrievably co-opted with existing ways of doing things that by the time that they saw the levers of power, they didn't actually want to do anything interesting with them. And so that created a bit of a kind of mini crisis for me. What is it that I should be doing with myself? And I met at that point someone who was a kind of bit transformational for me in terms of it recommending the power of part-time working. Did take on a part-time role and then use your other time to pursue social change activities in kind of non-standard ways, in ways that kind of reflect your other interests and passions, because there's too much interesting stuff to fit into a single full-time role. Hit the framing that he offered, and that was really significant. Stopped. I kind of opted out of that like inexorable rise up public service and thought, how can I find a job that I can feel positive about doing, but enables me to have enough space and time to pursue all sorts of other interests? So I became head of program and then chief executive of an arts charity in the Northeast, where everybody worked part-time. So I was working combinations of 3 or 4 days a week at different points in that, and that allowed me to experiment with pursuing other interests. So one of those other interests, I became interested in how we do public management, because essentially I became to see that how we did funding and performance management created the conditions when nobody told the truth to each other across across public and voluntary sectors. And the confusing thing to me was that everyone else treated that as just a game that we had to play. Oh, it's just how it is, isn't it? You just got to fit in with that. But no, it's not. Just a choice. If everyone recognizes that the way that we do funding, the way that we do performance management, the way to do those things is getting in the way of doing effective work, let's change it. And so the space to experiment with that around my kind of main job, if you like, I became a a visiting fellow at the business school in Newcastle, and started to do kind of research there on a voluntary basis, and that grew more and more and more interesting. And eventually I realized that was the thing I was most excited about. And so I packed in my job as a charity chief executive and became an action researcher into public management, supporting public service organizations to make different choices about how we organize public service. And that led me to, over time, becoming a professor and being a consultant in that space. So,
Yeah.
like I say, it's a career.
Yes, yeah, fascinating. Can I drill into a couple of things that you raised there, and then we'll get on to the other questions. Your point around the academic theory side of it, and then combining that with action. I think that's why I connected so much with you in that event a few months ago. One of the main reasons I wrote my book, you can't see it behind me, the Fit to Care book, was I was completely motivated by another professor, Professor John Bobeke from Toronto University. And he talks about relevance realization is ultimately what we're all about as humans, and meaning and purpose come into that in a major way. But he talks about 4 elements of knowledge which combined create wisdom. And that ties in with Socrates. I've got Socrates on my desk here at all times. And that's all around, we normally work at just a propositional, academic level 90% of the time, especially senior managers making decisions and business cases and such like. It's just academic knowledge. And yet you get on the floor and work with people on the front line, and you pull these other 3 elements of knowledge together. So the participatory knowledge being a big, big one, perspectival and procedural. And that had such a profound impact on me that it's really driven me in all sorts of ways. I feel like we might be using different words, but it feels like you're really close to that.
Yeah, exactly. What you're saying really resonates with me there, Anthony, because for me, theory is a way of creating really rigorous, destruction-tested stories about the world. Because our stories are the way that we make sense of the world, right? So we fit everything, our experiences, are like down to our sensory experiences, into the stories that we're telling about the world at any given moment. And good critiquing and developing and making good theory is our process of reflexivity about our stories. So it's making sure that the stories we tell about the world and ourselves are subject to proper critical evaluation, that the stories we tell aren't just kind of comforting lies for ourselves. The stories we tell aren't subjugating others, right? So building good theory is a way of really like subjecting ourselves to rigorous examination.
Yeah. And if we have all 4 elements of that knowledge, then you get to a place where you're actually becoming quite wise. But just in isolation, it's important. Every one of the 4 is important, but in isolation, you're going to make the wrong decisions.
I would recognize the different components of wisdom. I would make no claim to wisdom for myself in any of this stuff.
Well, I'll make it for you, because I think you're getting there. And then the other thing I just wanted to drill into was your point around, this is my wording, but the dysfunctional behavior. And the chief exec, or the people get into those senior positions, were they I'm sorry, I'm getting into this zone. I might be annoying the listeners, but were they ever philosopher kings, or were they never the right people in the first place to get into that role, because they never really were there in the first place, or did it get sucked out of them as they progressed up the ladder?
Oh, what an interesting question. I mean, I suppose the first thing I would say is that the kind of philosopher king model that you're describing is only one potential kind of archetype for an interesting, effective leader, right? So there's it's one that particularly appeals to me because it resonates with a bunch of the ways that I see the world. But I would strongly resist the idea that everyone needs to be a philosopher king to be an interesting or effective leader.
Yeah.
the I mean, one of the one of the things that I kind of noticed was that the the kind of leadership roles had really little time for reflection.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that happened, I think that this was a tendency before kind of uh, the choices that were made that created kind of public service austerity in the UK, but it the choices around public service austerity turbocharged this tendency, which was to remove the space and time for reflection in in kind of any level of public
Yeah.
service activity, from the people doing the public facing work to like leaders with kind of seniority.
I
And
agree.
we the we deliver those people who made those choices were deliberately making public service more stupid, because
Yeah.
they're not in like the people who made those choices aren't interested in the state working well. They're not interested in public service working well because it fundamentally undercuts the ideology that they use to understand the world. So they don't want public service to work effectively. So one of the ways that you can make public service not work effectively is to reduce its thinking capacity.
Wow, that we could have a few days talking about that one, I think. Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then I'll just quickly touch on this before we move on, but I think it's linked to that as well. Is that I think people get sucked into that. They're so busy, they're not reflecting, they're not thinking. And I think the command and control approach and scientific management approach of siloed working, and you're most efficient if you're in a silo, is completely ridiculous when you're looking at complex systems.
I mean, yeah, so that's the position that our research has ended up taking, because I think it's really clear that that's what the evidence tells us about new public
Yeah.
management as a kind of instantiation of that scientific management approach, like Taylorism written into public service. Um, so I would absolutely agree that, and it's actually it's a useful point to add on to the point that I was making before, that public service was deliberately made more stupid through austerity. It's also that new public management doesn't reward that kind of thinking and reflection, because it says it tries to demarcate the kind of thinking. There's that kind of interesting strategic reflection is the domain of just a few people up here.
Yeah.
Everyone else is to be controlled. Like,
Yeah.
actually, that as a whole way of working discourages people to think, because thinking creates rebelliousness and deviation from the
The control.
the most efficient delivery and strategy that these people up here have worked out. So,
Yeah. And I also think linked to this is that people become conditioned, I guess, to those silos. And the most important thing for me today is to meet my KPIs. And often my KPIs are completely at odds with the care, in my case, a lot of the time, with the care of that patient. Nobody's thinking about that flow and that actual patient. They're just thinking about, I've got to do 30 of these today. And actually, if that means this patient doesn't get a good deal, doesn't get a proper review, doesn't get a proper diagnosis, then it doesn't matter. I've done my quota.
exactly so, Anthony. And the one of the ways to look at the problem that you just identified is that we have created this massively dysfunctional relationship with data.
Yeah.
So rather than using data to illuminate and inform conversation with the citizen patient being served, right? So how can data help me to understand you and your context better, and connect me to the things that might be relevant to us both exploring how to make your life better? So data, fantastically important for that. But that's not how new public management uses data. New public management uses data to control people.
Yeah.
So that you, as you say, you will hit this KPI, otherwise we will punish you. But
Yeah.
if you hit all your KPIs, bring, we're talking promotion and advancement in the organization and reward, right? So data becomes an instrument of control for exerting reward and punishment on people. And in those circumstances, data becomes the people are subject to data. They're not using data for their own reflection and improvement and learning. And
Yeah.
once people have that kind of relationship with data, then their capacity for getting better at what they do kind of disappears and melts. Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I don't want to labor this too much, but just one last point. You touched on it earlier, and it really resonated with me. Is I won't get too detailed because I'll uncover things that people wouldn't want me to uncover. But just as a generic point, you get into a place where that command and control sets some rules and targets and regulations, and you were almost getting to the point where people are going, computer says no, and there's almost no brain power involved in anything that we do. So I can see that altruistically there was a certain policy generated for good reason at the beginning of this policy, but it wasn't completely thought. It's a bit like setting laws, I suppose. If you rush things through, you don't set a good law, and it comes back to bite you. And I think the same with some big policies is that it was done with good intentions, but it wasn't properly thought through. And you get to scenarios where it's ridiculous. It is almost lock-upable in terms of levels of corruption, the results that come through from strictly following a certain policy. And I feel like I can't go ahead with that. I can't do it. I just can't do it. And yet senior people will just go along with it. And I find that unbelievable.
And it's the you've reminded me of where I was trying to get to before, but I managed to distract myself with my own ranting. Always a danger. The more senior you get in an organization, the more abstracted you are from the actual work that it does.
Yeah.
The work that organization does in the world. And what that means in the kind of dominant management strand is that all you see are data abstractions of that work. So the more senior you get as a manager, the abstractions of key performance indicators and red, amber, green ratings become your reality. Right?
Yeah.
So, and when those are your day-to-day reality, then making change in the data becomes the purpose of your work, right? Because if that is all of the reality that you see and touch in your kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month working environment, then changing the data becomes your purpose. And it's that subversion of purpose where people are surrounded only by the abstractions of the work rather than the reality, engaging with the reality of people's lives and the reality of serving those people. That's how part of how we get ourselves in this kind of mess, right?
Yeah, that is brilliant. That's another absolutely brilliant piece of this. We'll release this as a video, and I'll maybe pull that bit out as a clip. There's lots of good clips, but that's a brilliant insight. Absolutely amazing. So, how would you? I'm not going to stick to many of these questions because we've already taken half of our time. But how would you like to go forwards? Because my general feel is focusing on where we think the solutions are with this sort of stuff that we've highlighted here, because I think we've tipped into some really interesting stuff already. And I guess it'll be really good with the time we've got left to focus on the future and what can we practically do to deliver change and make things happen, and who's involved and what can we do. That would be great if we could focus on that.
Well, the kind of niche that I find myself occupying at the moment is about how we change public management. So how we choose to organize, govern, fund public service. And I just wanted to pick up on one point earlier that you were making. So your framing around this is about the public sector. Obviously, that's framing you chose, and in some respects, the framing that you choose is entirely up to you. I would choose to frame it as public service rather than public sector. So, which is obviously a kind of much broader definition of who serves human freedom and flourishing. So when I think about public service, I think all of those actors who support human freedom and flourishing with kind of purposeful action. So
you know what, I'm going to change my LinkedIn profile after this call, because I agree, I prefer it. I much prefer it.
So how do we make that kind of purposeful change in public service? So, like, I'm interested in how public management is a structural impediment to doing public service well. So, because at the moment, essentially, as long as we choose to manage public service through a new public management ideology, then it makes it 1,000 times more difficult to have effective public service if we're choosing new public management as our management paradigm. So how do we create change in that? We continue, like, there are every day increasing numbers of people who are fed up with the story that new public management tells about how to manage public service. They can't make their working life make sense using that story of markets, managers, and metrics anymore. Right? They've done all of the things that new public management tells them to. They're incentivizing people in the right way. They're measuring this. They've done all of the things they were supposed to do, and still it doesn't work.
I'm sure we could argue it's worse as well.
Yeah, exactly. So how, like, supporting those people to realize that, because when you can't make sense of your life using the dominant paradigm story, it feels really isolating and can be kind of like create a sense of like real kind of crisis of confidence of people, right? Like, I'm going mad here. I can't make the world make sense like this, you know. So reassuring those people that they're not going mad, that actually the fundamental dissonance that they're experiencing between their own working lives and this story about how it's supposed to work, that they're experiencing that dissonance because this model is fundamentally broken. And so what we can do is we can find by highlighting the evidence around the flaws in that, by telling stories about how we can organize the world differently, by enabling people to share their experiences of how broken the current approach is, we can help build a constituency of people who want to make the world different. Right? And it's that the critique of this stuff is only important to the extent that it helps people realize that they can make a different choice. The actual work is about them building bits of the public service universe where a different set of rules apply. And that's what we can do together. And the only way we can do that is by experimenting together. By purposefully creating experiments in how we do management differently.
And physically showing that this is a better way. Look at the results. Look at the well-being.
Look at the results. But it's not about evidencing people into change, because you can't evidence people into paradigm shift, because paradigms, if you're within one paradigm, you ask different questions and you treat evidence differently, don't you? So it's not really about evidencing people. It's about creating bits of the universe that just work better and inviting other people in. The evidence about how much more cost effective it is to work in a human learning systems way than the new public management way, or is important because people are attracted by that. But it's not the evidence that brings people. It's kind of inviting people into that world and just come see how much better this works. Come see how much more fun that everyone is having. Come see the amount of.
And now what we've just done there is move from the academic propositional into the participatory. Come and feel it. Come and be part of it. That creates the eureka moment, or the seed of change, and then from there you can actually change.
And so, there is a bunch of support work that's often required to enable people to enact the kind of experimentation with doing management differently. But there's also a bunch of kind of pre-work for that, just helping people feel like they have a choice around this stuff. Because again, what new public management tries to do is it kind of tries to strip people of a sense of agency that they can choose to do these kind of things radically differently.
Yeah.
So kind of a big part of what I'm about is simply trying to enable people to recognize that they have a choice around how to do management.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, and it really resonated with me, your points there, because I interviewed 20 nurses for my book, and absolutely those points were shining through, you know, scarily so. You feel, well, I was actually really getting emotional on several of those interviews, the depth of pain that these guys are going through.
Friend and colleague Mark Smith has a beautiful word that I think is helpful. He describes approaching these kind of change stuff with furiosity. So because it's appropriate to be furious with how badly we are managing things, because it's a choice that people made, and it's a choice so we are actively choosing to manage public service in a way that was designed to destroy it right now. So we should be furious because it's having terrible impacts on people's lives, the way that we choose to do management. Every time people choose to manage by targets, they are negatively impacting on people's lives. Right?
Yeah,
we should be furious about that.
Yeah,
but also, like the flip side of that is that furious people tend to make really terrible change.
Yes.
Because if you're cross all the time, then you don't learn very well, and you don't engage with other people, however. So the furious, the other aspect of that is it's the curiosity. Like, actually, what are other people's lives like? Why are they framing? Why do they see the world like that? And let's understand each other as human beings in order to see the world through other people's eyes. Right? That is equally, if not more important than the kind of anger is an energy bit about our need for change here.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The furious element giving you the energy to create a bit more justice in the world, but also you're still with it in terms of bringing all those factors together to create some wisdom and some better choices to actually deliver the change.
Well, also just like and recognizing that anyone involved in kind of public service stuff is a human being that has the full kind of spectrum of complexity of being a human behind them. Like there are vanishingly few people who turn up at work in public service who want to make things worse for people.
Yeah,
vanishingly few of those folks. So if someone is being a complete and like seemingly obstructing or going like, what is it that's going on for them that underpins how they're behaving and acting and whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a ridiculously easy thing to say and a really, really hard thing to do. And I would say that I'm particularly prone to not doing that very well. So
it's just being aware of it, isn't it? Another quote that comes back to my mind is watch yourself like a cat watches a mouse hole.
Yeah, nice.
And then you've got a chance of keeping on top of all these things.
Well, and also going back to your Greek philosophy stuff, it's the unexamined life is not worth living, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Here he is. Here he is. He's always with me. So solution-wise, I'm just really interested to get your views on this. So what happened to me about 18 months ago, I had a eureka moment where I won't go into the story of the detail, but just a highlight overview is I just was struck by top level decision makers, good intentions, sensible, clever people, but operating at a propositional level. Very expensive investment as a result of that. And then I interviewed about 10 nurses about this project on the ground because it wasn't working as planned. And I had this revolution, eureka moment of, oh my God, the gap between here and here is so vast that it's inevitable that we're making multi-million-pound cock-ups, excuse my French, every single day. So my drive, one of the reasons to write the book and one of the reasons I've built a tool called Insight Genie. I'd be interested to hear about your tool as well. my mission is to try and bridge that gap between the knowledge and the wisdom on the front lines, so that we can consolidate and assimilate and make sense of that really quickly and easily, so that these guys have got better information to make better decisions. That's my big drive.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm finding is if I designed the software to be really easy and really cheap, and there's loads of reasons, but I'll be interested to see what your view on this is. If I do everything for people, it's like, my God, that's good. But if I was designed to it's dead easy to do, it's really cheap to use, there's AI involved, you do it. Let's just open this up and make massive change really quickly. You can essentially, that angle of qualitative research that usually takes months and costs tens of thousands, we can do within days for pounds as opposed to thousands of pounds. So in my mind, it's like, why wouldn't we do this on that scale? And yet I'm still interested in trying to figure out what's going on psychologically. And part of it could be we don't want to know. We don't want to open a can of worms. Part of it is fear of AI, I think. And it's a really interesting area. But yeah, I'm just really interested to get your view on that, because you will have lots of insights from your background and experience that would be great to hear.
So I'm trying to remember all the different things I want to say in response to that. So I suppose firstly, I would say absolutely one of the potential kind of game changers in the kind of large language model bit of what people call artificial intelligence is the capacity to treat qualitative data at scale without it being stupidly expensive and time consuming.
Yeah.
So that that is a real that's a game changer for exactly the reasons that you describe. That it enables us to have richer information and use richer information at scale. So we no longer have, if we're interested in scale, in understanding a wide range of things at once, we no longer have to rely on the kind of pulverized abstractions of quantitative of data. Which, that sounds like it's judgmental about quantitative data. It's absolutely not. Because those kind of abstractions absolutely have their place in context. But one of the things it doesn't enable you to do is to really develop a nuanced picture of what's going on. So absolutely, I think that kind of the potential to capture nuanced information from public-facing practice and from citizens' lives is I think really important. And that brings me to the gentle challenge that I will offer you just once, because if it's not kind of relevant or interesting to you, feel free to absolutely ignore this. But I picked up on the language of frontline when you talk to me about this. Frontline is the language of war.
Yeah.
Right? Why do we use the language of war to describe public service? Right?
Yeah.
Are we at war with our citizens? Because that's what the language of frontline not just implies, but that offers as a mental construction around. So, and the number of times people use the language of war to describe public service, and how effective, and what that really demonstrates is how effective the language of control and concepts of control
and you don't even realize how you've succumbed to it, because that hadn't occurred to me, but now you say it's like, oh my God, he's right. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, so tell us about, I'm really pleased that you think that I'm on the right track. I've got the right ambition for this, because I will keep plugging away. My fear is that I'll end up working with private sector businesses that grasp it and just move with it and get it done, compared to the public sector and public service, which is where I want to be.
I mean, what I would say about that is that the kind of one of my favorite thinkers about how change happens is Donella Meadows, like system
Okay.
thinker. I mean, her systems dynamics framework has a bunch of problems with it in terms of kind of complexity and all that kind of stuff. But she's an incredibly wise she was an incredibly wise person in lots of ways. And one of her most useful bits of framing, I think, is when you're seeking to create change, don't waste a single second on the skeptics. Right?
Yeah.
You'll never talk them into it. You'll never evidence them into change. Like when you're trying to make those kind of radical shifts. So if people aren't interested or don't want to engage or like actively like put down or rubbish the things you do, don't waste a single second on them, because you'll never convince them. Like the go where the energy is such important advice, I think, in that kind of space. And if because if you can prove the usefulness of the approach that you're talking about in private sector spaces and build up a bit of capital behind you in doing so, then it will come to public service eventually. So
Yeah.
I get exactly where you're coming from with that kind of worry and with that kind of concern, but the kinds of change that we're talking about are difficult enough without bashing our own heads against walls. So
You're right. Yeah.
avoid head wall bashing as much as one possibly can, right?
Yeah. No, it's great advice, and I'll look her up as well. So moving on to your IT system, then, what is it you're doing with that?
Oh, so it's a kind of extension of the human learning systems work we've been doing. So essentially, what we've been able to kind of say to folks, the kind of the long story short with this is, if the purpose of public service is to help people create positive outcomes in their lives, we need to understand how outcomes are created. And what we know from actual research about this stuff is that outcomes are emergent properties of complex systems.
Yeah.
And the challenge with complex systems is that no one controls them. They can't, like you can't control. There are pull levers to make a complex system produce a desirable outcome. But what you can do to make complex systems produce desirable outcomes more frequently is turn those complex systems into learning systems. So systems that are capable of purposeful experimentation to move in a particular direction towards the desired outcomes that we want. So the question for public service is, how do you turn a complex system that no one controls into a learning system? And so what we've been able to kind of discern through the action research of like over 80 different places and organizations around the world is we've got a bit of a process map from looking at all of the things that people have done to turn a complex system into a learning system. It's called a learning cycle. So the digital tool that have been developing is to enable people to create and undertake their own learning cycles and to connect those learning cycles together so that people can do shared experimentation and blah, blah, blah. And through the process of recording the phases of activity and what people learn as they're doing a learning cycle, by making a digital tool that records that activity and enables them to capture what they're learning, it makes that complex learning system governable. And this is the kind of crucial aspect, right? Because in public service, we need to make all of our actions governable, because that's how accountability works. And so it enables us to shift the focus of governance and accountability into these learning processes that are the things that actually create outcomes. So what we're doing is creating a bit of a digital support tool that enables people to develop and run and share their own learning cycles. And the hopefully interesting thing about that is that on the one hand, that can be an information system for public service. On the other, it's also a tool for anyone in their own lives, because any person in the world who wants to make purposeful change happen is likely that purposeful change is likely an emergent property of a complex system. So if I want to sleep better, this is something that's a bit close to my heart as an occasional insomniac. What's my life as a system that enables me to sleep better or worse? So what are the factors in that system? Who are the actors in that system? Blah, 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 blah. And I can like, draw myself a little systems map of the way that factors interact. Right? And then once I've done that, that's the start of a learning cycle. And then I can ask, the next phase of that as a process is to ask, okay, if now I understand my life as a system that either prevents me from sleeping well or would enable me to sleep better, what experiments can I create for myself? What action research can I do that enables me to experiment? So for me, the experiments that I designed for myself were things like, what happens if I watch fewer Newcastle United games? Because part of my understanding my life as a system was seeing how stressed I got watching Newcastle, and that impacted negatively on my sleep. What happens if I exercised in the mornings more? What happens if I try and address what I think might be a histamine intolerance that gave me these insanely itchy legs that was running and making sleeping? Okay, so I can do experiments in respect of each of those things. So basically, I'm treating my own life as action research. And so creating this digital tool that enables everyone to live their life as action research. Basically.
Okay, fabulous. So there's two things that I've got to just quickly pick up on. In terms of your sleep example, I'm going to have to email you my PDF of my book. So chapter 10 in my book is really closely linked because I've used sleep as an example as well. There's a slightly different angle to mine, but there's a lot of crossover there. So mine's a bit more around. So you've discovered that it's the Newcastle United game. Mine is then taking you on to, right, how do you make sure that you don't watch the Newcastle United game? Sort of a system to make sure that the change actually happens. So I'll send you that because chapter 10, hopefully you'll really like it. But there might be some crossover. If you want to steal some of it to apply, then definitely.
Amazing. All right. And because I am not less interested. That's not right. It's less in my immediate purview, the kind of how behavior change works in people, but folks like yourself and my partner, funnily enough, that's the area of exploration that they're really interested in. How does behavior change actually work for human beings, basically?
Yes, but if you combine them together, we're getting to that wisdom place again.
Exactly.
And then the other thing that I just thought about was potentially Genie could feed your learning curve into your system. So it's great to give you a 15-minute demo at some point, just so you can see the connections and see where it might take us.
Absolutely, and kind of looking to make those kind of interrelationships with different tools and methods. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think we've captured a lot of great stuff. I've really enjoyed it. Are there any closing points or factors or elements that you'd think from my career or from my experience, any big things that you would really like to share before sort of us closing down and feeling, I wish I'd let people know that, because that's a big thing?
I suppose the thing that was most transformational for me was the point I kind of mentioned before about part-time working, and the associated point that I didn't make actually was understanding and managing my own time.
Yeah,
kind of transformation, because the came to realize that actually one of the few things we have genuine control over is how we choose to spend our time. Right? It's one of the things we as human beings have most agency around, right? But in order to manage one's time effectively, really need to understand how long it takes you to do different stuff. So using like time recording, creating time recording for yourself about how you spend your time is, I think, it was so incredibly powerful and liberating for me to be able to actually see how I was spending my time in respect of the intentions that I had in the world. That I heartily recommend like the practice of kind of day-to-day time recording. I still started it about best part of 20 years ago. I still kind of record how I spend just about every day down to the 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, really interesting. I set up a course doing that. We've got a lot of crossover. Set up a spreadsheet to do exactly that, and it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? It is eye-opening.
Exactly. Like how my sense is it, because if you're not managing your own time, you're not really managing.
No, and most people are stuck in that paradigm of I haven't got time. It's back to that no reflection, no thinking. And this was a couple of years ago now. I said to some people in a GP practice, if I can spend 20 minutes with you on this topic, and then it will save you, I promise you, it will save you an hour every single day for the rest of your life. And it's like, I haven't got time for 20 minutes. I haven't got time for 20 minutes. And then it's back to your point. Don't try and bang your head against a wall, because it's just some things you just can't change. But the time and the place is not right. That's exactly how I'd look at it now.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Well, I've really enjoyed it. And maybe if we get some requests, we might do another one on certain topics if you ever get time. But I'd love to stay in touch with some of the things we're doing, see if we can get some connections going.
Yeah, that would be fabulous, Anthony.
And just to close down the Desert Island Discs link, have you got a favourite song that you would share with us?
Okay, I'll just the one that popped up immediately when you asked when you framed me that question. Sylvester, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real.
Excellent. That's a great tune. What I should do with these is put the song or a little tiny clip of it on the end. That's what I might try and do. Right, fantastic. Thanks ever so much.